couldn't help but notice during the earlier part of your presentation that 1 in 4 people in the world are Muslim, but that the dominant science in the world is Western. Are you, with the questions you pose, are you critiquing just the West's continuing colonization of other countries and other minds in the world?
Could you, as you said, Carl, the acoustics are. Yeah. Can you just repeat?
Yes, sorry. Okay. That 1 in 4 people in the world are Muslim, but that the dominating science is Western and therefore has Christian influence. Is that, in you kind of posing these questions of what would science in Islam look like? Is that your way of critiquing, just the Western's continued colonization of the world?
I see. What I said was that every fourth person now living on earth is a Muslim, meaning 1/4 of humanity is Muslim. And the domination of Western civilization, primarily through its science and technology of all other civilizations, is a reality with which we have to deal at some level. Does that mean there is only one culture, there is only one way of living, there is only one way of being, there is only one way of producing what we eat and consume? Or is there room for other cultures and civilizations to exist on this earth? The history of the last 3 centuries is not very hopeful. It doesn't give us hope that anything would be left other than what has become a global reach now. So more and more we are seeing this appearance of diversity of species, of cultures, of races, of forms in which we live. We're talking about this Amish community. These communities which have lived together in a certain way for centuries are finding it more and more difficult. The transforming power of modern science and technology, which remain rooted not in Christianity, but in this modern secular religion of its own, is such that it is disruptive of our religious traditions, of all religious traditions, not just of Islam. But in my last lecture, I have a quote from Heisenberg which tremendously attracts me, and I wanted to save it for that, but because of your question, he said that every tool that is invented has the spirit of the civilization in which it is invented. A tool has a spirit, and when it goes to different cultures, it carries with it that spirit which pierces through that culture and disrupts it. So there are deep transforming forces now ripping through the entire world.
can the science of today be brought into the body of Islam? Can it become an Islamic science?
MashaAllah, very, very, very thoughtful question. If we could make it more concrete, is the science of the human body. Can there be more than one sciences of the human body? I gave the example, specific example of medicine. There are two, at least two, if not three or four, different sciences of the human body even now, at this time, even at this advanced stage of Western medical science. The way the human body is perceived in the Chinese, Hindu and Islamic world is so different from the way modern medicine perceives it. In addition to the constituting elements of atoms, there are properties, four major properties, four basic properties that are taken into consideration. Each substance and each organ in our body has the property of being hot, cold, dry and wet. These are the four ancient humors. And one of the slides was, I didn't have time to mention in detail, was Avicenna's book Qanun fil Tib, the Canon of Medicine. Canon of Medicine is an encyclopedia of medicine, of knowledge that had been gathered up until his time, which is the 11th century. He put all the known diseases in that canon of medicine and their cures. The body was conceived as interacting deeply with the spirit. So in addition to the physical ailments that would come because of the physical reasons, for example, contamination or some germs or something, the our spirit actively affects the physical body. So the medicine that treats the physical ailment also takes into consideration the state of the health of the spirit. Two different conceptions, they are still operating. Now, can there be another science in all domains? Perhaps not. The world we understand is made of atoms and molecules. Atoms are made of electrons and protons and subatomic particles. All of this may very well be true. And it is providing answers to our working. This cell phone is working, this microphone is working. Therefore, the laws which have been developed must be valid laws. But I gave the example of Newtonian physics, which is still operating at a certain level of reality. If we're dealing with large bodies of, like a steam engine, it would still obey the Newton's third law of gravity, for example. Like these are approximations. At the quantum level, those laws break down. So what I say in terms of possibility of another science, it may not be precisely in each and every segment of science, for example, chemistry, physics, biology, etc., but it would still be different, sufficiently different in its goals, its aims, in its exploitation of the natural world, its conception of reality as we see it in science, in the natural world. So these are meta-scientific aspects built into the enterprise of science.
To make a comment in the same vein here about whether there's one sort of science or several sciences. It would seem to me that when you look at science today in the world, it is changing so rapidly because so forward, so fast, hopefully not for the destruction of the world. Okay? And so, I'm wondering whether some of the ideas that you're talking about are going to be lost in the rapid change of everything, which is happening, maybe in the next 2 weeks or something. Things are moving ahead so fast. You're trying to understand how nature works. It's not answering the question, the questions of why or is this important or how is this related to God. These are all important questions. Just the scientific questions, seem to be being involved in a larger sphere of something in other research. And so that's my comment. I'm not sure it's a question.
What you say is true to a certain extent. There is a parallel to Newton's laws and the quantum laws in what you said. There is no doubt that there is a large body of scientific knowledge being disseminated regardless of where it originates. But it's equally true that there is a large body of scientific knowledge being kept secretly by a certain segment of humanity that is not accessible to everyone. Not only that, there are organized institutions which are parceling out scientific inquiries into smaller and smaller and smaller segments and giving one to you and one to me and one to someone in California. And the mastermind is sitting up there in Washington, D.C. and seeking your discovery and his discovery and putting it together to make something that would make millions and millions and millions of dollars, or create power, create weapons of mass destruction, make centrifugal machines which they would bar Iran to acquire. They would put embargo on certain countries to acquire that kind of knowledge, but they would keep it to themselves. The sugar mills, the hormones developed to induce into the cows, which would produce more milk. The grains of rice, which used to grow in a certain part of the world, and one corporation would come along and say, wait a minute, your rice grains, they produce 5 tons per acre or whatever. Take our rice seeds and you will have 10 tons of rice, right? But the only trouble is that the genetic modification of that strain of rice is held by this particular corporation, and that soil would deplete because now you have 10 tons of rice coming out from this seed, and these seeds cannot be reused by those farmers. So yes, there is dissemination of general low-level science and scientific investigation, but the higher level of science is still being controlled, from food to weapons to pharmaceutical industry. When an epidemic starts, these little vaccines, you saw this last time we were in this epidemic mad cow situation. These medicines are being held. So knowledge is still controlled. So both of these worlds are operating side by side. In Saskatchewan, which used to be the grain, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, as some of you know, is the grain capital. Farmers can no more produce their grain because the corporations are forcing them to use a certain variety of grain. And those grains come with specialized fertilizers which can only be bought from these corporations. This knowledge is nowhere to be seen. And who developed it? Scientists did, but the individual scientists had no clue. Same thing with computers. My nephew is working in California with Intel, and he says they give us this tiny little project to develop this next generation hardware, and we don't understand where this little thing is going to fit in their bigger scheme, And they're going to make millions of dollars out of this little invention that we are going to do, but we have no clue. So who is controlling this? Who is controlling the direction of science? I was in Iran just last month. That country has suffered tremendous. There are people dying there because of lack of spare parts for their aeroplanes. Just last week, 60 people went down. Their planes are so old, they cannot even buy parts for those planes, and people still have to fly to go to cities. The planes just disappear from the skies because they cannot buy the parts.
One more question. I think it's only a time question. I think we need to bring this to a close. One more question.
This is just kind of off of what we were just saying, but would you say that the modern era has kind of been a change from like governmental control of science, like obviously with the Industrial Revolution and the rapid rate of science, we have more power with those who control science, but scientists have always been controlled by some aspect. Do you think the change from like religious bodies or government to corporations is like one of the leading problems of this?
So the two aspects. Number one, before the rise of modern science, people we call scientists needed to have patrons. They would find a ruler, a rich man, somebody who would say, okay, don't worry about your making your living. Here is your money. You go and solve this problem. Not because that ruler needed their knowledge. State at that time was not an enterprise that governed the economy, that governed the industry. There was a distinct separation of state and economy and economic structures, and obviously the enterprise of science. So science did not immediately become utility to invent technologies which would sell or bring power to the state as it did now. And one of the most agonizing things, for me at least in terms of thinking of science, is the lack of independence of scientific institutions and scientists. Science has become so expensive that if you want to start a project on developing a seed, for example, you don't have the resources. Nobody has the resources because everything has become so expensive. When a corporation, the State Department, Defense Department, whoever puts in the money, they control the results. And it's the structure, that's what I refer to. This science has an economic structure, a political structure, a sociological structure. So these structures have evolved along with modern science. Science has become hostage to the interest of the state. As a result, what we see as knowledge, as scientific knowledge, is scientific knowledge, but at a very low level of its utility. So it's very difficult to see where it will go, where it will end. There is no such thing as a universal science that is acceptable, that is available, accessible to everyone anymore. Only partial, segmented amount of low-level knowledge is the common domain. And that has been an important aspect of the rise of modern science. The time it takes for a scientific discovery to become technology, usable technology, money-making technology, has been shortening. This is a very interesting study. There are certain books, very few, but certain books have been written on the time it took in the 19th century, for example, for a scientific discovery. I gave the example of Boyle's law of gases, for example. That was in the 17th century. It took almost a century for it to become a steam engine. Now we get technologies like immediate connection between discovery and money making. And this is through the institutionalization of the patents, of the discoveries, and making money, the economies. So the destruction of which I will talk in the third lecture, the destruction of the food chain. The food chain, the food that's going into our bodies now, if you go into details, you wouldn't want to eat anything. It's so bad. It's so bad. But how did it happen? Through scientific discoveries which were put for the profit.